Hi, this is Jeff, and I have Sherry here, and we're going to try a little project working through a book that I've recently read. It's called Spirits in Bondage, a Cycle of Lyrics, and it's the first published work by C.S. Lewis. I can't remember the publishing date. I was going to look at that, but it was a long time ago. But apparently, it's the poems that are in this book were written starting somewhere around 1915. But there's a little bit of a historical background that I'll get more into here in just a second. But I guess just a quick introduction of myself. I am highly interested in C.S. Lewis. I have not read, well, embarrassingly, I have not read any biographies on the man. The only things that I've ever read are books that he wrote himself. So I did read Surprised by Joy several years ago, which is somewhat of a, I guess people call it a spiritual autobiography. But yeah, I know only what I've read about him and some of the things that I've listened to people say about him. Only the things that I've read that he wrote, I should say. So that's me. And Sherry, do you want to do a quick little intro to tell folks about yourself?
Yeah. Well, as far as C.S. Lewis goes, I've always been a fan. I've read the Narnia Chronicles. I've read the Space Trilogy, Mere Christianity, The Great Divorce, and then some of his essays. Quite a number of his essays, actually. And what I like to do is go into. There's a couple of really great bookstores in Victoria, BC that have like really dusty old, way at the top kind of. And I look for old copies of C.S. Lewis. That's kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. I try to find old copies. I actually found one. I don't have it handy. I should have brought it out here. But that had a newspaper clipping with an article about him on when he died. It was an old newspaper clipping in the book.
Wow.
Which is kind of cool, yeah.
And you have this, or you just saw it in there and you didn't get it?
No, I have it.
You have it. Nice.
Yeah. I bought it. Brought it home. It's to go in my little collection of C.S. Lewis stuff, right? And I never actually came across this book. And so I heard about it from you and downloaded it from Gutenberg.org and read through it. And I have to say my first impression was of an angry young man. Mm-hmm. That was my first little bit that I read. Yeah. I think he's 22 or something when he
pretty young. I think some of these poems I think were written before, but some of them may have been written after again. If people know more about this, I invite them in the comments to educate us. But I get the impression that some of it was written either during or after his experience in the trenches in World War I. So he got to see a lot of the horror of humanity on display firsthand. So I get the sense that that's coming through several of these poems.
Yeah, you do too. Yeah, and he's even at that young age, he's grappling with the idea of God and suffering and injustice and all the stuff that the world serves up on its ladder.
So I've been looking forward to going through this book with you in particular, because I know that you have shared on Paul Vanderklay's channel some of your poetry and that you read and write poetry. And I'm not a very big poetry person. So I am, just interested in working through this and seeing some of it through your eyes as well, and bouncing some of my ideas off and seeing how ridiculous my ideas might sound.
Well, don't worry about that, because I have no formal education. I actually, and I hate to say this, but I'm going to put it out there, I haven't even graduated from high school, Jeff. So, but I have always written poetry, always, from a very young age. Actually, a lot of my poetry were songs, and I would put music to them. I would sing them. I didn't play any instruments. Mm-hmm. And I think when I was about 22, 21, 22, I decided to learn how to play guitar so I could actually accompany myself
Mm-hmm.
to some of my songs, you know. And when I was in, this is kind of just a cute little story. When I was in grade 1, the teacher said that she wanted us to write a story. So in grade 1, you know, kids are learning how to write. They're learning how to spell, and, you know, big words for them are words like dog and cat, right? And so she said, I want you all to sit down and write a story. And if you have any difficulties or any questions, you can come up to my desk and ask me, and I'll help you with your questions. And whoever finishes the story first gets to go to the library. So we weren't allowed, we didn't, for some reason, the grade 1 kids didn't go to the library. I guess they figured they couldn't read. So, you know, and I was dying to get into that library, you know, and it was a very small country school. I think our library was a utility closet. Like it was that small, right? Mm-hmm. And so I remember writing a story about a prince and a princess. That's, you know, I remember those words. And I had to ask her how to spell almost every word because my words were like, you know, 8 letters long and not 3, right? Mm-hmm. And I finished my story, and she took me by the hand and took me to the library. And, you know, I will never forget that moment where she opened the door of that little closet and the smell of the books just hit me, right? And I felt like, oh, yeah, I still love the smell of books, right? And she told me I could look at all the books and I could pick any book I wanted. And I picked 101 poems by Robert Frost.
Oh, wow. This was grade 1?
That was the book I took home, and I read it. I didn't read the whole book, but I read it as well as I could, right? Uh-huh. And that's where I fell in love with words and with poetry and I guess the thing that I love about poetry is that you can take a huge concept and you can condense it down into a few really poignant words, you know, that just drive that whole idea home.
And you got this Robert Frost book from the library. You said you were in 1st grade?
1st grade.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's my little story, my little Robert Frost story.
All right. Well, I like it.
Yeah. Okay, so you want to go ahead and start?
Yeah, I'll get started. I'll go through this historical background, and then what I'd also like to do is I'll read the prologue, which is in and of itself a poem too. So I'll get into the historical background and then go into the prologue, and then we can take off from there. Historical background, it says published under the pseudonym Clive Hamilton, which, by the way, Hamilton is his mother's maiden name. So he originally published this under Clive Hamilton. The name of the book is Spirits in Bondage, and it's C.S. Lewis's first book, released in 1919 by Heinemann. It was reprinted in 1984 by Harcourt Brace Jovanovich. I don't know if I've ever been saying that right my entire life, but that's how I say it. And included in Lewis's 1994 collected poems. It is the first of Lewis's major published works to enter the public domain in the United States. Let's see, I'll jump ahead. Most of the poems appear to have been written between 1915 and 1918, a period during which Lewis was a student under W.T. Kirkpatrick, a military trainee at Oxford, and a soldier serving in the trenches of World War I. Okay, I thought that I had read that. The outlook of the poems vary from romantic expressions of love for the beauty and simplicity of nature to cynical statements about the presence of evil in this world. In a September 12, 1918 letter to his friend Arthur Greaves, Lewis said that his book was, quote, mainly strung around the idea that I mentioned to you before, that nature is wholly diabolical and malevolent, and that God, if he exists, is outside of and in opposition to the cosmic arrangements, end quote. In his cynical poems, Lewis is dealing with the same questions about evil in nature that Alfred Lord Tennyson explored from a position of troubled faith, end quote, In Memoriam, A.H., stanzas 54F. In a letter written perhaps to reassure his father, Lewis claimed, quote, you know who the God I blaspheme is, and that is not the God that you or I worship or any other Christian, end quote. Whatever Lewis believed at the time, the attitude in many of these poems is quite different from the attitude he expressed in his many Christian books from the 1930s on. Attempts in movies and on stage plays to portray Lewis as a sheltered professor who knew little about pain until the death of his wife late in life have to deal not only with the many tragedies he experienced from a boy on, but also with the disturbing issues he faced in many of these early poems. That's a little bit of background. So here's the prologue to the book. As of old Phoenician men, to the 10 isles sailing, straight against the sunset and the edges of the earth, chaunted loud above the storm and the strange seas wailing, legends of their people and the land that gave them birth, sang aloud to Baal Peor, sang unto the horned maiden, sang how they should come again with the brethren treasure laden, sang of all the pride and glory of their hardy enterprise, how they found the outer islands where the unknown stars arise, and the rowers down below, rowing hard as they could row, toiling at the stroke and feather through the wet and weary weather. Even they forgot their burden in the measure of a song. And the merchants and the masters and the bondsmen all together, dreaming of the wondrous islands, brought the gallant ship along. So in mighty deeps alone, on the chainless breezes blown, in my coracle of verses, I will sing of lands unknown, flying from the scarlet city where a Lord that knows no pity mocks the broken people praying round his iron throne. Sing about the hidden country, fresh and full of quiet green, sailing over seas uncharted to a port that none has seen.
Mhm. Yeah, okay, well, with that historical introduction, this makes a whole lot of sense to me now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's just letting the reader know where he's going with all of this, you know,
Yeah.
what his aim is, I think. I mean, that last verse really states it well. Flying from the scarlet city where a Lord that knows no pity, you know, this is the God that he's blaspheming, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mocked the broken people praying round his iron throne. Sing about the hidden country full of fresh and full of quiet green. And you know, that's in reference to some of the poems that are actually quite beautiful and peaceful. There's a sense of peace, you know. Sailing over seas uncharted to a port that none has seen is, I would assume, going to war, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I got the sense from the prologue, and again, you know, you can interpret art, poetry, literature in so many ways. And you know, maybe I'm just reading into it, but I got the sense of, you know, a hope for something better or a hope for something more. And I've expressed this theme myself in other conversations that I've had, but you know, that's what I pulled out of it, is somewhere they're desperate for some place unknown where there's something better, you know, than this existence or this life that we have right now. And so that's something that I took away from it. Although I do know, you know, he was struggling with many things, but I think there was a part of him that was thinking, this is all wrong, the evil in the world. I'm hoping that there's something better than this, or there's something deep in me that longs for something better than this, whether there actually is or not.
Yeah, I agree with you. Just looking at it here, he's talking about the people who are toiling, right? The rowers down below, rowing hard as they could row, toiling at the stroke and feather through the wet and weary weather.
Mm-hmm.
Even they forgot their burden in the measure of a song. So he's talking about how everybody is, it's hard, right? Living is hard, and probably dying too. He's probably talking about some of that because he's just come out of the war.
Mm-hmm.
But even in all that misery, they're singing a song, and I think that that's probably the thing that has always bothered C.S. Lewis,
Mm-hmm.
is that, I think that poets are somehow seers. They see,
Mm-hmm.
And in seeing, much wisdom brings much sorrow, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and so when you look at the world through those kinds of eyes, you tend to wonder, why are they singing? Why are they singing? And but you can't say that they're not singing. So they are singing, and then you need to go and find out why.
Mm-hmm.
When you're a person like C.S. Lewis. So yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. And then he also says how they found the outer islands where the unknown stars arise.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's this line, in my coracle of verses: I will sing of lands unknown, flying
Mm-hmm.
from the scarlet city, where a Lord that knows no pity mocks the broken people praying round his iron throne. Again, that just ties in for me. I'm going to sing of lands unknown. I'm going to sing of, this thing I long for that we don't have, and this relief from this burden, from this pitiless, where I get no pity from the Lord of this city or of this world. That's just what I get out of that. There was you mentioning, poets or seers. There was a conversation on Justin Brierley's Unbelievable podcast, which I'm subscribed to. And so when something pops up and it looks like it's interesting, I'll go listen to it. There was a recent conversation that he hosted between Malcolm Geit and Mark Vernon, who have had some play on Paul Vanderklay's channels. Paul has talked to Mark, and he's played part of a video from a speech that Malcolm Geit gave. Now, Malcolm Geit in particular, because they were really focused on Owen Barfield in this discussion on Unbelievable, it was about, though, C.S. Lewis and Owen Barfield's relationship, and perhaps how Barfield influenced Lewis, but then really focused in on Barfield. But one of the things that Malcolm Geit said about Lewis, just as far as you mentioning poets as seers, is that he thinks in some cases Lewis's poetry, was able to get better and more at the way of seeing the world and the way of experiencing the world, and the type of consciousness that humanity has or could have. I forget what some of the Barfieldian terms of it were, like final participation. There's another one that I'm forgetting, but anyway, the point being is Malcolm Geit spoke very highly of some of the imagery that Lewis was able to evoke and some of the feeling that he was able to evoke in his poetry that he wasn't necessarily able to accomplish in even his fiction that he wrote, much less his apologetics type work that he wrote. So that's just that there reminded me of that conversation.
Yeah. And I what I've been doing the last few years is struggling really hard to try to write prose, because I've always written poetry. And for some reason, I thought to myself, well, you're just being lazy because you don't want to write a whole sentence or a paragraph. Right? and Shari, you need to sit down and you need to figure out how to write this prose. you need to write some paragraphs and you need to stick with the story. And, this is what I'm telling myself, right? Yeah. And what I found, I still want to do that actually, but what I found was when I'm writing poetry, I'm underneath the thing that I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. When I'm writing prose, I'm on top of it. It's like I'm down on it.
Interesting.
But when I'm writing poetry, I'm underneath of it.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to bring some of the key elements to the surface. Mm-hmm. So I'm like in a handful of treasure, I'm going, look, look. That's what it feels like.
That's neat.
And and so it makes sense that he would be deeper in his poetry. Mm-hmm. Because when you're writing poetry, you're in a deep place usually anyways. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know. I would actually love to know what the psychological significance of writing poetry or poetry is. Uh-huh. Because it's a form of language, and I don't have any education around it, so I don't know. Maybe there's a whole book about this out there, and I just don't know. But
yeah,
poetry is it's a totally different way of it's a totally different language.
Yeah, it seems to me that in poetry, and I've written maybe like 2 poems in my entire life. I have no idea where they are now, but as you were saying that, it just reminded me that it's almost like you're getting in touch with parts of yourself that are unknown, or parts of your ways of knowing that are not obvious to you. And you talking about coming in from underneath. It's like there's so much deep down embedded underneath, what it is that we even call ourselves, that if we were to see the whole thing, we would probably just be terrified and just
disgusted.
Overwhelmed all at once. Some things disgusted, some things fascinated with, some things terrified, and so we only get to see a very small part of what it is that we call ourselves. And I think poetry, and writing poetry in particular, but probably reading it too, is helping you get in touch with parts of yourself that are otherwise inaccessible.
Yeah, and I mean, just speaking from my own personal experience, when I write poetry, I'm the kind of person who feels driven to write something, which is okay, but it shouldn't be that way. Like, you should actually be able to just sit down and write something. But so for me, it was a thing. It has to come out, and that's how it came out in the form of poetry. And always when I would, write a poem, I would look back on it, and it was so clear to me what was going on in me. Mm. It was there. It was, and yet it's not clear, mm-hmm. But it was, to me, it was very clear. But it's ambiguous. It's like you're hiding behind all these words, Yeah. And the reader can look at it and say, well, that's a beautiful metaphor, but really, the deeper meaning, right? Like, what that is actually saying, but you don't know it until you write it down. Like, yeah. It's such a magical experience. And so you are kind of woven in to the words in such a way that you can't, somebody else can't see you, but you can see you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think so. And you talking earlier about how, your love of poetry was one of the aspects, is how you can take these big, perhaps otherwise inexpressible feelings, ideas, thoughts, and condense them into this carrier that is that still expresses those larger things, even though it's in this tiny little package. It's like it reminds me of Karen and Michael's conversation. I don't know if you got to watch that, about like compression and compressed files.
Yeah. Totally is that.
I think I was only able to follow about 20 to 30% of that, but that's what it reminds me of. So.
Yeah. Although data compression is too it's too sterile a term for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay,
All right.
so this book is broken down into 3 parts, if I remember right. And so part 1 is called The Prison House. And I guess as we go through, we can kind of talk about what we think that means. But the first poem within part 1, The Prison House, is called Satan Speaks. And Shari, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind reading that one, and then we'll talk about it.
Sure. Satan speaks. I am nature, the mighty mother. I am the law, you have no other. I am the flower and the dewdrop fresh. I am the lust in your itching flesh. I am the battle's filth and strain. I am the widow's empty pain. I am the sea to smother your breath. I am the bomb, the falling death. I am the fact and the crushing reason to thwart your fantasies' newborn treason. I am the spider making her net. I am the beast with jaws blood wet. I am a wolf that follows the sun, and I will catch him ere day be done.
It's a nice, light little poem.
It's pretty satanic. Yeah, Satan speaks, eh? It's interesting that, you know, being agnostic, or I don't know if he was ever an unbeliever, but I guess he does call himself an atheist, eh?
Yeah.
He was an atheist.
At one point, he had identified as atheist. And he said pretty thoroughgoing, if I remember right. That may have been his words.
Yeah, although I think a lot of atheism is actually a form of hatred towards God. You know, I you know, just my experiences with some people who call themselves atheists. I'm thinking in particular of my father-in-law, actually, that he hated God. He wasn't just an unbeliever. And I often wondered, how can you hate something that you don't believe in?
Yeah.
You know.
Well, it's.
But,
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go.
I was gonna say, you know, it's interesting because I was in a conversation earlier today, and one of the points that was brought up was like, you look at somebody over the course of their life, and like if they shift from identifying as a believer to then being, you know, an atheist, or then being an agnostic, and all these different labels, you know, I'm not sure what I think about this, but it's almost like it's the breadth of a life, you know, represents, it's kind of in a Jordan Peterson type fashion. It's like what you believe is actually what you live out. So how you live is a better representation of where you are. Theologically is the wrong word, but spiritually, faith, however you want to put it, however you look at the world. I think the way that you live your life is the best label that you can put on yourself. And when I read this poem in the context of having Lewis's life as it's transmitted to us through the books that we have and the things that we know about him, this poem is just a representation of, you know, something that he struggled with at a time, and that he was trying to integrate into his person, into his view of the world, into his relationship with the world. And so when I read this Satan Speaks poem, you know, I think it's a common, it's a thought that goes through a lot of people's minds, particularly, you know, in our culture and in this, you know, generation of this generation of humanity at this time and place in the human family, is this wrestling with, you know, all these things, everything that he's saying right here. This is all true about life and about existence. All of these things are there, and they are real, and they are in your face. And you know, the question that some people offer up, or the place where it takes some people, is, I just cannot believe, this is where a lot of nuns and duns go, I just cannot believe in an intentional mind like I know minds to be my own and the people that I interact with, that there is this all-powerful mind where these things are real and can just go on.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the places that takes me is I get that. I get that thought. I understand it. I agree with it. And then the place it takes me to is, and if there's nothing out there, well, then what does that get me? These horrible things still exist. You know, who is it then that I can pin these atrocities on if there is no one to pin it on, right? And that's probably a weird way of saying it, but it just leaves me with, you know, if I am talking to somebody who says, you know, I'm just certain that there's no God, and that's the reason, is because these things exist. And I say, well, then, you know, this existence that we're in itself, it carries out all of these atrocities. It's just like it doesn't make me feel any better if there's not a person that I can blame it on. If it's just like, oh well, that's just the way it happens, it's still horrible. You know, for me, it doesn't solve any issues. And
then if you were to take that thought further down the road, which you eventually would, well, if there's no person to pin this on, then everything is for nothing.
mm-hmm.
Then all is for nothing. And then you become automatically nihilistic.
Mm-hmm.
You might be none and done for a time, but you won't be none and done forever.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And what I see here too is, and I guess I'm relating it to my own life. As a young person, when you come out of the confines of your home and your education and your friends and your church, and, you know, you have a fairly healthy environment around you most of the time. And then you step out into the world, and the world is not nice. It's malevolent.
That's right.
And so you face malevolence for the first time. And it's disconcerting, you know, unless, of course, you're street smart and you've grown up with it, then it's not a surprise.
Right.
But if you aren't, it can be traumatizing,
mm-hmm.
right? And I mean, for him, it was even more so the case because he was sent to the trenches.
Yeah.
You know, so here he is, he comes out of this, you know, fairly, I know he didn't have a perfect life, but it wasn't that, you know, and he could trust people, right? He could trust people, and he didn't see people doing things to each other that were malevolent, that were just evil for the sake of being evil.
Yeah, like in war, exactly. I do know that, well, he lost his mother at an early age to some type of illness. So he lost her. And, you know, as a boy, you know, he did get these waves of this cold wind of reality, you know, smacking him in the face. And I also know from his Surprised by Joy book that, you know, he went off to a school for boys where there were just, you know, horrible things happening. He was seeing, you know, the boys treating each other terribly. I think the schoolmaster of one of his schools was declared legally insane. So he did get exposed to some pretty rough stuff, and it's almost like a out of the frying pan into the fire type thing when he gets thrown into the trenches of World War I, and just seeing all of, you know, the horrible evil of, you know, just what combat, just the horrible experience, which I have no firsthand experience of, and I'm scared to death of ever, you know, being involved in it. Just hearing about it and seeing it represented, I'm sure that all the most graphic and difficult representations pale in comparison to the, you know, the terror that you actually go through in that. And he experienced that, and, you know, he's being honest about it in these poems, and, you know, in his way of trying to work out what the nature of existence is if these are the things that can and do happen.
Yeah. The thing is, though, I think that as a child, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit, because I did read Surprised by Joy as well. And, as a child, you are fairly resilient. Like, we have this innate way of dealing with trauma as children. Like, it's just part of who we are, most children. And I know, I'm saying this, but I have a brother who suffered from, who is schizophrenic because of childhood trauma. So I know that it can be otherwise. But
well, we have as children, we have very resilient and very effective defense mechanisms that are built in that help us to survive and help us to protect ourselves. And those things they do eventually manifest themselves in adulthood. Of
course.
Yeah.
But we do have an imagination.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And we can escape to our imagination. And as we get older, we lose that ability, right? We can't escape into our imagination. We can't take our toys and talk to each other and work things out, I remember my youngest daughter one time, she used to take some of her toys. She had little dinosaurs, and she would take those little dinosaurs up to the creek, and she'd put them in, strategic places on rocks, and it just looked like some prehistoric setting. And she'd play up there for hours with her dinosaurs. And one day, she was about 12 and a half or 12, and she came down back to the house, and she was crying, and I said, "What's wrong, Amelia?" And she said, "Mommy, I've lost my imagination." Wow. She was devastated. She was devastated that she couldn't be in that world with her dinosaurs, right? And so I think you're protected, by your imagination. But then you get out into the world as a 20-something-year-old, and you're like, okay, I got all the tools I need, and I'm going to go out there and I'm going to go talk to that person. And they're going to be, they're going to like me, and we're going to strike up some kind of conversation. Maybe I'll get a job, my boss is going to be really nice to, you just have all these ideas about how it's just going to go.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't. Then all of a sudden your boss tries to manhandle you, or someone tries to, someone shares with you how they're embezzling in a company, or, and you're just like, what? It's a really rude awakening to this other form of malevolence, right? It's not the same kind of malevolence that you have. And although I think the boarding school was probably pretty close to that too, but maybe I'm just relating it too much to my own experience, but that's kind of when I read this, I could imagine myself writing that at that age. I could imagine myself saying, this world it's a horrible place. Horrible people and unspeakable evil, and I can't trust anybody. And that would kind of be that would be my take on it too. That what he's writing there, that would have been my take on it at his age.
Yeah. Now that you mentioned that, I do remember at that age writing something. I don't know if it was poetry or what it was, but it was just writing out some thoughts. Nothing near the type of horrors that he's writing about there, but certainly a similar spirit. You mentioned it's multifaceted, the types of malevolence that you can go out there and face, when you step out into the world as an adult, and it can be, it's varying degrees, of severity. But yeah, I remember writing something about that where, I was just talking about how things just would never go things just didn't seem to go the way that I wanted them to. And, I wrote about, it taking on, its own personification, like it was something that was standing out there, like a shadow that was always in my way and always trying to stop me, and happy about, slamming me down into the ground and, pulling the rug out from under me and all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
And it does feel like that when you're that age. Like it really does feel like there's something, something black and shapeless and malevolent.
Yeah.
Shadowy.
Something up against you.
Yeah. Interfering in your happiness.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Getting in my way. Why don't things just go the way I want them to?
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Next one?
That's poem number
Next
one.
poem.
Poem number two is, I'll read this one, French Nocturne. Mon cher le plus. I probably said that terribly, but I'll give that a shot. Do you know any French?
I do, but I don't know if I could say that any better than you did.
Okay, that makes me feel a little bit better, I guess. Okay, here we go. French Nocturne, Mon cher le plus. Long leagues on either hand the trenches spread, and all is still, now even this gross line. Drinks in the frosty silences divine, the pale green moon is riding overhead. The jaws of a sacked village, stark and grim, out on the ridge have swallowed up the sun, and in one angry streak his blood has run, to left and right along the horizon dim. There comes a buzzing plane, and now, it seems, flies straight into the moon. Lo, where he steers, across the pallid globe, and surely nears, in that white land, some harbor of dear dreams. False mocking fancy, once I too could dream, who now can only see with vulgar eye that he's no nearer to the moon than I, and she's a stone that catches the sun's beam. What call have I to dream of anything? I am a wolf, back to the world again, and speech of fellow brutes that once were men, our throats can bark for slaughter, cannot sing.
I really liked this one when I read it.
What'd you like about it?
I loved it. Well, I just, it's evening, right? French Nocturne. It's kind of like, it's an evening setting. It's cold, drinks in the frosty silences divine. I love the jaws of a sacked village, stark and grim. I can imagine that, on a ridge. You see all these like teeth that were once buildings, but they're all bombed out.
Yeah.
And they've swallowed up the sun, so the sun has, gone down behind them. And then the plane flies by and everybody looks at it and just thinks of, like he's up there and he's flying over it all and he's going somewhere better, and so for a moment you're in there, you're in that plane and you're wondering about the place where he's going and where his feet are going to land and how nice that's going to be, because you're sitting in a trench staring at a bombed out village and blood and and then he says, once I too could dream, who now can only see with vulgar eye. And I thought that was really interesting because he feels polluted. His eye has seen now. He's seen all the brutality and, how is he going to ever dream pure dreams? How is he ever going to think pure thoughts? How is that vulgarity that has polluted his eye, how is that ever going to be taken away, pulled out, and then he says, well, what call have I to dream of anything, right? I don't deserve that. And then he says, I'm a wolf.
Yeah.
Right. He's a soldier, he's a hunter, he's a killer. That's his role now. And then he says, back to the world again. So for a moment, he's romanticizing the scene, right? He's looking at the sacked village and the sun going down and the plane flying by. And then all of a sudden, reality says, you are never going to see the world like that again.
Yeah, it's like they're like, I imagine that they're sitting there getting ready for like a night's watch in the trenches, standing guard or waiting just in case something happens. And, his mind wanders to, there's something other than this. And the plane buzzing by is him, imagining, oh, he's able to escape all this. He's able to fly someplace, and then he catches himself. You know, this is a mocking fancy. It's false. I could dream once upon a time, but now, you know what? He's not escaping anywhere either. He can't get out of this existence. That plane, he's never going to be anywhere nearer the moon than I am, just flying up there in the sky. And then, even worse, the moon. What is the moon? The moon's just a rock that's hanging in the heavens that reflects the sun. That there's nothing special about that either. Even if I could get to the moon, what then? And then, he does bring it back down to his situation as a soldier, like you said. What? How can I dream of anything? I'm an animal. I'm a trained killer. I'm here to kill, and I have my fellow brutes, and all we can do is bark for the killing of other brutes. We can't sing. We're wolves. There's no singing here. There's no longing for anything beyond what we're in. We're fooling ourselves. I'm fooling myself with this brief fancy that I had as we sit here in the silence and we wait.
Yeah. Yeah, the plane kind of ended his daydream and brought on reality.
Yeah.
And I had a thought there before. I'm just trying to remember it. Yeah, he's, it's that feeling like two different people at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I was going to say. It's like when that plane in that third stanza, the middle of the poem, basically, it's like the schoolmaster comes along and says,
yeah,
snap it, quit daydreaming.
Yeah. Don't forget where you are.
Yeah, don't forget who you are. You're just a wolf, barking for the slaughter.
Yeah.
Right? You can't sing, you can't dream, you can't, But what I found the saddest line in that poem is, who now can only see with vulgar eye. It's like he feels damned. He feels damned in because of it.
Mm-hmm. He's stained. He's tainted.
He is, yeah, and he is that romantic that wants to see the sacked out village as as something beautiful with the sun setting behind it, and but he can't. He doesn't know at this point in time if he ever will.
Yeah, it's so interesting, the things that you can do with poetry. Again, I am such a novice with it. I'm a neophyte when it comes to poetry and really a lot of literature. But, he just paints this quick little scene and then it's gone. You get to sit with it and then you're just like, man, that's a really tough, he gets like a splash of cold water right there and then it's done. And then, okay, on to the next poem.
Yeah, and it's like back to reality. This is a malevolent world. Don't get too comfortable. And I mean, that would actually explain the title of that part of the book, the prison.
Yeah.
You're
This
in
part of the
prison.
book, prison. Yeah, he feels stuck, and he's being reminded as much as he tries to dream. It reminds me of the Shawshank Redemption. It's I can't remember at one point in the film, but Red, Morgan Freeman's character, tells Andy Dufresne, he admonishes him for bringing hope, for introducing hope into the prison, because that's what gets people killed, and it just reminded me of that. You have he was for a faint moment having hope as he dreamed about where that plane as a way of escape, and that was not, he got smacked. He got he got smacked in the face by Red, saying, "Get that out of here! You're stuck in a prison."
Yeah, and you're just a wolf, and don't forget it.
Yeah.
Do
you want to read this third one? I think we've got enough time for one more before we both have to go.
Okay, one more. This one I kind of liked. The satyr When the flowery hands of spring forth their woodland riches fling, through the meadows, through the valleys, goes the satyr caroling. From the mountain and the moor, forest green and ocean shore, all the fairy kin he rallies, making music evermore. See, the shaggy pelt doth grow on his twisted shanks below, and his dreadful feet are cloven, though his brow be white as snow. Though his brow be clear and white, and beneath it fancies bright, wisdom and high thoughts are woven in the musics of delight. Though his temples too be fair, yet two horns are growing there, bursting forth to part asunder all the riches of his hair. Fairy maidens he may meet, fly the horns and cloven feet, but his sad brown eyes with wonder, seeing, stay from their retreat.
You know, of course, my mind with this goes straight to the Chronicles of Narnia,
Mm-hmm.
because one of the first character that we run into in the Chronicles of Narnia, if you read them in the order that they were published, which is a separate conversation about the debate around what order you should read those books in, publication or chronological.
Oh, really? I didn't know anything
Yeah,
about that.
yeah. I probably publication order is what I would go in, but there, I put my cards on the table. So Job, if you're ever going to read those, I would say read them in the order that they were published. Um, yeah, but the first character that we meet in the Chronicles of Narnia, in the actual other world of Narnia, is a satyr, is a character called Mr. Tumnus, and so I was just reminded a little bit of that in when I was exposed to this poem.
Yeah, I did a little bit of reading about the satyr, and it's really interesting. I mean, we know that they were the man with the goat body and the horns, and that kind of thing. They were also the god of shepherds and shepherding, but they were also the god of sexual pleasure, which I thought was really, really interesting. I said to my husband, shepherds and sexual pleasure. What is
There's some, I'm doing an image
Sorry.
on Google right now. There's some very interesting representation of that.
I know.
Not safe for work.
You can't put them up.
No.
No, pretty strange stuff, actually.
I'm not going to share the screen here.
Yeah, but I'm thinking, if I don't know how chronological these poems are, but if, let's say they are, so if he's writing the French Nocturne and a few days later or a week later or 2 weeks later he's writing the Satyr, it could have been early spring, because in the French Nocturne he talks about how it was frosty, and in the early spring the mornings can be cold, or the evenings actually, and now it's the flowery hands of spring, and I don't know if you've ever been to Europe in the spring, but it's just ablaze with flowers. It's just like the flowers everywhere. All the trees are blooming, and there's daffodils, and there's it's just beautiful. Woodlands especially, really, really lots of flowers. And so he sees, he's there, it's spring, the flowers are blooming, and then he imagines the satyr, right? Running around, caroling and doing his thing. And I just wondered how much of that would be connected to his need to, as a young man, to have a girlfriend, to be together with somebody. It's a beautiful day, just want to hold her hand, and,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, that's kind of the idea that I got when I read it. Because he ends the poem with fairy maidens he may meet, right?
Mm-hmm.
But his sad eyes with wonder seeing, stay from their retreat. So, he's thinking about girls. Mm-hmm. It's spring, and he's thinking about girls. He's a young man, you know. That's kind of what I got from that.
And he's got in here, that's an interesting read on this poem. I think you're onto something. And I'm trying to figure this last stanza out, or the last 3 lines of the last stanza. Fly the horns and cloven feet. So it's like, is he saying that the satyr is running away or running towards? Because he goes on, fly the horns of cloven feet, but his sad brown eyes with wonder, seeing stay from their retreat. So I don't know if that means if they're moving on, if they're leaving, he just stands still. Was he first running towards them, like he was pursuing them, and they were running away from him? So when he saw that, he's like, all right, I'm not going to chase them anymore. They don't want me.
I think that's probably, I mean, it's hard to say actually, Jeff, because of the way he's got it phrased here.
Yeah.
Fairy maiden may meet, fly the horns and cloven feet. So he's in the search mode, right? Seeking mode. But his sad brown eyes with wonder seeing stay from their retreat. I don't know what that seeing is. Like I said, he's a seer, right? Mm-hmm. So what is he seeing? Is he seeing himself as a wolf? Mm-hmm. Is he seeing himself as a foreigner in a strange land? Is he seeing the pain and the suffering in their eyes? And the fact that he has no business dreaming those kinds of dreams and chasing those girls in this situation. I don't know.
But yeah, he's got sad eyes, right? Mm-hmm. With wonder. It's like he's seeing something better or something greater in these fairies, or something worthy of pursuit or of having. But he's sad too, and I don't know. It feels to me like that theme of there's something more that I want, but I cannot have it.
Right. And this is a perfect example of where what C.S. Lewis has done here is he's woven himself in and around the words so well that you can't see him.
Yeah.
You can't see him, but he can see him. He knows exactly what that means, right? Mm-hmm. When he writes that, he sees that. He sees him, probably for the first time, I'm just going to guess. Mm-hmm. But, in having written it. But we can't see him. He's hiding.
Yeah. Yeah, and you think about how sometimes, it's very, again, I hear this and it makes sense to me. I don't know what the psychological literature on it is, but you're sometimes looking for some version of one or both of your parents in a mate that you're pursuing, or you're attracted to something like that. And the sadness of losing his mother might have been also tied up in the want for a mate. If we can continue to look at this through the lens of him, pursuing a lover. And, he's got that sadness tied to his mom and the loss of his mom built into him. And so I just wonder how, if any way, that's contributing to this. Is, again, we talk about, you're digging up things that are down deep and a part of you that you don't necessarily know are there until you start writing through these things.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, I don't know.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't know if it has to do with his mom too much, because I think it has to do with that whole idea, like he, in that previous poem where he says, what call have I to dream of anything? I am a wolf, back to the world, and speech of fellow brutes that once were men, their throats can be slaughter. Yeah. Because in the previous stanza, he says, though his temples too be fair, yet 2 horns are growing there, bursting forth to part asunder all the riches of his hair. So, he's not that, because he's he's a monster, right? He's not that attractive to those girls. Mm. He feels like that. Yeah. It's not that they're saying that. So he's like, you know, my temples are, I look good, but, oh, all of a sudden, my hair parts, right? And there's these horns.
Yeah,
It's that
bursting
idea
point.
of, yeah, it's that idea of, oh, wait a minute, I'm a wolf, you know, wait a minute, I'm a goat, you know,
Yeah,
horns and cloven feet, like I'm not a, right?
yeah.
So,
The fair skin temple of the brow is, you know, kind of a representation of innocence, and but the horns bursting forth are like, no, you know, you're tainted. It's that tainted idea again.
yeah, yeah, because he says there, though his brow be clear and white, and beneath it fancies bright. Like he's
Mm,
got lots of imagination, and he's smart.
yeah.
Wisdom, my thoughts are woven in the musics of delight,
Mm.
but two horns are in there, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So he's feeling a little bit like a monster again, you
Hmm.
know.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I enjoyed this. I think this is a good place to stop right here. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm it's good to talk through these and bounce different ideas because I'm seeing different things that, you know, I never would have seen before just reading it myself or listening to it. So
Same here.
I've really enjoyed this and I appreciate it.
Yeah, me too. Me too. It's really good.
Okay.
That's great because that's as far as I got in reading ahead.
Oh, great. Oh, that's good.
Between beans and sheep and goats, you know.
So many things. All right.
I
Well,
know.
we'll have to do this again soon, but with enough time for you to do some more reading into it, so you can be, you know, prepared to give some more thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. Let's do it, Jeff. You know, if we go at this pace, it's going to be like a 30-year project.
Yeah. Well, we'll do it when we can. You know, it's nothing
Yeah,
urgent. So we'll continue to move through as we find time, and if people want to watch,
sounds
you know,
good.
they can go on the journey with us. So
Yeah,
I'll end the
awesome.
recording right here.